Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephanie Lambert, and I am the president of the ACC's Northeast chapter. My day job, I'm Chief Compliance Officer at NetScout Systems in Westford. And I'm pleased today to introduce you to Veta T. Richardson, the president and CEO of the Association of Corporate Counsel, who's here to talk to us about her brand new bestseller from Amazon. Welcome, Veta.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're so glad that you took some time today to join us. I've had the pleasure of reading your book. It's called Take 6, Essential Habits to Own Your Destiny, Overcome Challenges, and Unlock Opportunities. I wanted to first talk to you today, Veta, about your role at the ACC. So I introduced you as the president and CEO of the ACC. Can you give us a little bit of what a typical day in the life is for you as a leader of this very large global organization?
Yes, well, I will say day in the life tends to be a little bit cyclical. So this week, what's interesting, Stephanie, is that we're preparing for the ACC Global Board meeting that is going to be taking place in Philadelphia next week, and it's the first time the board will actually gather in person for a little more than 2 years now. So really excited about being able to see everyone and gather personally. So there's been a lot of committee meetings and discussions about what's going on next week. So that's kind of filling my days this week. As I mentioned, that's cyclical. So weeks start with briefings from each of the vice presidents on their areas of responsibility, what's going on, what's coming up. Right now, we're also in the process of thinking about our next strategic plan, what we call SB 3.0. So there are a lot of discussions, data gathering, member surveying related to it. So days really vary. No day is the same. Fridays, I generally allocate Fridays for catch-ups with relationships, members who want to talk, my mentees. I have lots of young professionals and students that I mentor. So I kind of reserve Friday for those sorts of investments in people. So it's very varied.
Yeah, interesting. So varied. I'm sure it keeps you very busy. Before we continue, I did want to mention to our viewers that if they had any questions for you, that they can put them in the chat. I do have some prepared questions, but we're certainly welcome to hear from our members. So the next question is thinking through your career. And I know that you went right in-house out of law school, but you made 2 major career transitions. One was from an in-house attorney practicing for what was a Fortune 50 company that had 30,000 employees with a very large global legal department. And you moved from that to an in-house counsel role at a very small nonprofit that had 30 employees. And then you decided to stop practicing law and you became the CEO in the position that the day-to-day activities you just described. So my question is, can you talk a little bit about the risks you took to make those transitions and how you prepared yourself for each of those significant career changes?
Yes. So Stephanie, one of the things that I shared in the book is in some cases, I didn't prepare myself well enough to jump. So that first jump, though, from in-house to go into nonprofit life and work as Deputy General Counsel at ACC the first time, that was a little bit more well thought because I had been a member of ACC since I graduated from law school. One of ACC's founders was the general counsel that hired me. So moving to ACC felt safe in that it was an organization that I knew well from an entirely different vantage point as a member. And because it was such a shift, I think the general counsel was pleased that I wasn't moving to DC to work for ExxonMobil at the time, for a competitor. And so they actually said, you know, this is a big shift for you going from corporate securities law to working at a nonprofit. So if you don't like it, it's okay. We'll hire you back, but you have to make that decision within 2 years. So my first jump, I jumped entirely with a safety net that, okay, if I don't do well or I don't like this, I can go back to what was familiar, at my former company. So I had that safety net. When I jumped from ACC to MCCA in the top role as executive director, I didn't do my due diligence well enough because the organization was basically broke. So I went from a safe organization where payroll was secure to one where, sometimes I kneeled down and hoped that checks came in order to make it. So, I would say I spent more time thinking about stepping away from law. But I found at the ACC job that a lot of the entrepreneurial things I really enjoyed. So from that aspect, walking away from law was a conscious decision. But where I walked to and not doing my financial due diligence, I should and would have been fired at my old job at Sunoco for doing a transaction without looking more closely.
Mhm. That's an interesting comparison.
Yeah.
So in terms of those skills that you had, that you developed, obviously in law school, then at Sunoco, through the ACC, those skills, how did you transfer them to your executive role, and which ones have you found to be the most valuable to you in this new, well, it's not new to you, but in this different position?
Yeah, well, now it's been almost 11 years. It'll be 11 years this summer at ACC as CEO. But I would say that the skills that have served me well are the skills that I learned as corporate counsel and supporting businesses and achieving their objectives. It's caused me to use that lens to think about ACC strategies. So I think definitely the experience working as corporate counsel, I draw from those learnings and business learnings in particular. I also have a business degree. That was my undergraduate background. So being comfortable with financial statements from, the time that I graduated from college has really served me well. And I think that though for this executive role, this role is challenging because I report to a board, 24 top executives at their own companies who turn the lens to look at what we do at ACC. So it's a position that really keeps you on your toes to meet those expectations. And I think what I learned from securities disclosure, being part of the team that wrote management's discussion and analysis that really thinks about reporting to a board, what they need to know in terms of how we're advancing strategy and objectives. I got that training through the work that I did working on, Sunoco's annual reports and information. And I think that that's really served me well. So when I sit down to write for this board, it's kind of like I'm thinking about the skills that I had when I was writing for Sunoco's investors or its board of directors.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. I like that. I was thinking more along the lines of, interpersonal skills or, trying to herd the cats, if you will, in house. But I love that. That's really an interesting transition. So now that you've added best-selling author to your list of achievements, in addition to being president and CEO of the ACC, I'm curious as to what motivated you to undertake the writing of this book.
Yeah, well, I will say that I had a hand and encouragement extended to me. And so that helped me get over the hump of seeing myself as maybe being an author. I've mentioned that I spend a good bit of time and always have since I started practicing law and mentoring students, mentoring young professionals, talking to young lawyers about, helping them find their way. And at different points, especially in my role at MCCA, I was asked to give remarks, keynotes, go to law firm, professional development seminars, speak to corporate counsel. And I tended to rely upon these habits because people would say, talk about what young professionals or people who have career aspirations should be looking to do, to advance their goals. So this set of principles I had been talking about for quite a while, and each time I would talk about it, I received good responses. People would come up and say, have you written an article? Have you written this down? I was taking notes, but I couldn't jot it down fast enough. Can I talk more about about it with you? So that's how I knew that it was connecting with people. But honestly, I was lazy and I didn't really want to take on the task of writing a book. And I didn't even think I could. I know legal writing, but I didn't know that that would be appealing until I met an author. Her name is Rose Orr, and she is, a terrific lawyer who now makes her living at writing. And she interviewed me for an article she was writing for a professional journal. And she said to me, you should really write a book. I see a lot of material here in what you're talking about. And that validation is what caused me for the first time to think, oh, it's not just, people I've talked to from an audience, but there might be something there. And then having more time on my hands during the pandemic and wanting to stay off the sofa in the evening, it gave me something else to think about.
Well, I certainly wouldn't use the word lazy to describe you. And I've been involved in the ACC for many years, over a decade, and admired your presence and the work that you do, and your leadership. So I think we can divorce that word out of there. But I'm glad that there's a sort of a silver lining in the pandemic, and that you were able to put these ideas, pen to paper on these ideas. So all of our viewers have received an advanced copy of the book. I'm curious of those 6 habits that you write about, and that is, what the book is, how it's structured. Which one do you consider to be the most essential?
Yeah, so definitely the habit of take stock. So these principles evolved from principles, and actually it was the perspective that I gleaned from the ghostwriter, the very talented woman, Deborah Hilton, that worked with me on the book to kind of coach through. Deborah was the one who said, these shouldn't just be principles, they should be things that people do habitually. That's how it turned to habits. And take stock is the one that I think is most important, and therefore dedicated, I think, the most focus in the book on, because take stock is all about really that self-examination of where am I right now? What skills, what abilities do I have right now? Really being honest with it, asking other people's opinions, because we all have blinders to what we might need to do differently. So really digging in, where am I now? And where is it that I want to go? And once you determine where you want to go and what are the traits that people who are there might possess, then you can do that gap analysis. And you can start to think, is it about education and training, experiences that I need to have, types of projects that I need to manage, information that I need to raise my current awareness around, networks that I should be participating in a lot more proactively. So it's really about thinking about where am I now and where do I want to go and close that gap. And the bigger the gap, the more short-term plans that you're going to have, because I think as very, we're all, in terms of to be even a lawyer, very type A driven, goal-oriented people to begin with. You have to set your goals in reasonable bites that are achievable to encourage yourself to keep going, especially if the gap is really wide. So I think that the habit of take stock is one that we should be doing frequently, to be able to close those gaps. And the other habits help you gap close.
I like that approach. Yeah, I think if you were to do the first one, I don't know, is that maybe like, if you're 50% there, but you're probably further along in your path.
Yeah, exactly. And Stephanie, you can use the other habits, because you think, okay, where am I now? Where do I want to be? If I'm a little bit confused about what is it that I need to demonstrate or achieve to get to that future goal point, then you want to take a hand. You want to ask other people for perspectives. You want to talk to professionals who are in or closer to the point that you're aspiring to be, to understand what was essential to them to be able to get there. So take a hand. Or it might be that you want your next promotion. So you need to dig in and make sure that whoever is doing that evaluation, you're being mindful of presenting what you've brought to the table thus far and what you could, with investment in the future. So the other habits, you can't really get to them as effectively until you go through that self-analysis of take stock.
That's helpful. So like most authors, you reveal many personal stories throughout the book to convey the message, not only in taking stock, but in each of those, all of the 6. So personally, I find that that's a lot of vulnerability. So I'm wondering, did you find that difficult at all? And
Yes.
Obviously, you told a bunch of stories, so somewhere along the way, you got more comfortable to reveal, and maybe your writing partner helped. So I'm curious about how you went through that process to get to this really great outcome.
Thank you. Well, yes, and it wasn't of my own making or even volition, at least at first. And that is because writing a book, you're putting yourself out there and becoming vulnerable. And so had I not had a great writing partner, Deborah Hilton, my ghostwriter, I think I would have tried to, because I'm not a famous person, so it isn't as if, I don't know, Oprah Winfrey or Jeff Bezos, right? So, Warren Buffett, everyone leans in to what does Warren Buffett have to say? But I'm Veta Richardson. The world, maybe ACC people, but the world doesn't know me. And so my perspective would have been, why would I tell people when I failed? Like, that will just make them discount whatever I might have to say. But Deborah is the one who helped me appreciate that really talking about your successes and your failures and being more vulnerable, more authentic will make you relatable to people, because the people who pick up the book are aspiring to more. I don't think Warren Buffett has my book on his cocktail table or needs it. So it was that perspective that she brought to me, that you really do have to put it out there. And she's the one who helped probe, and after I got more comfortable with it and got it, then I could volunteer those stories myself. But at first it was really pulling to get me to share.
Well, I think congratulations on being able to do that. I think it really put a lot of authenticity in the book, and I think that it makes it that much more valuable that you were able to share all of those stories. And I want to reassure you that based on the frenzy here at the Northeast chapter, when we offered your book to folks and the frenzy and getting the book out ahead of time, that you probably are a star here, at least amongst the small in-house lawyer crowd. So we're not going to let you get away with that so easily.
Okay.
So thinking a little bit about the journey and sort of the personal stories and the material that you gathered. You were in-house, I'll just remind folks, you were in-house at the Sunoco first, and then at the ACC, and then you were executive director of the Minority Corporate Counsel Association. So in all of that, in that journey, just curious about where did most of the material come from for the book, and why do you think that is?
Yes, well, I think the years that I spent at MCCA were dedicated to looking at diversity issues and career-related, professional development-related challenges that people have. And certainly from my time at MCCA, I knew that you don't have to be a member of an underrepresented community, however you might describe that in the profession, in your jurisdiction or your part of the world. But everyone sort of wants the same thing in terms of career and fulfillment and opportunities to advance. So that was 100% of my focus for 10 years. You know, what causes the stumbles? What can people do to overcome stumbles? What can organizations do differently to create, a playing field where everyone can thrive? So those years and the research probably caused me to dig in and be a lot more introspect in terms of it. And certainly, the time at ACC and looking at going global and globalization issues and the differences that people encounter. So I think if I had to say, it probably would have been the years at MCCA where my role was specifically talking about people maximization issues. And then the lessons that I learned just from banging my head sometimes and making a mistake.
Those are the best ones, I think. Yeah. So we talked about taking stock. One of the other habits is the take command habit. And it really, for me, is sort of crystallizes the view of leadership. And so I'm wondering, this habit of take command, how has it evolved as a result of crisis management and the handling of the pandemic? And I'm sure there are others that maybe we're all not aware of that come across your desk. How has that habit of take command evolved as a result of those experiences for you?
Yeah, and Stephanie, I have to say, of all the questions that you asked, this was the hardest one. So I really reflected a lot on this. So kudos to you, because you really did a great job probing. I think, it isn't until you look back on some of the challenges related to the pandemic that you can really understand how it's influenced you as a leader. Because I have to say, going through it, you're just having those conversations about, how your organization can survive all the things and the disruption that's being thrown at it. And at ACC, I will share with the group that not being able to have our in-person events, there was loss of a lot of our normal revenue streams. So it was a really precarious and difficult time for our association. And I think that what I learned most is really the importance of our executive team and really coming together as a team, and leaning on the skills and strengths that other people had a lot more proactively and acknowledging that. And I also learned, our association was one where, people could work from home. It was 1 day a week. And I was convinced that, moving to anything different more than 1 day a week was going to mean the loss of our culture. One of the things that I learned is how strong our culture is as an organization and how dedicated people are to their roles, regardless of where they might be working or serving, our members. So it was also a time where, in making decisions, I wanted to collect more and hear more from all staff. So we did a lot more surveying than we've ever done of people in terms of their perspectives. And it wasn't just surveying, to say that we did it. It was really surveying to influence our decisions and not being afraid to say, okay, we may have been going in this direction, but circumstances came over the wall, and now we're going to have to approach things differently. So it was really a much more vulnerable time as a leader. I also felt like I needed to share more in terms of what I was thinking and feeling going through the pandemic as well. Because we all really did rely on one another to help stay sane and safe and aware of all the different variables that were coming at us. No one of us had all the answers. Yeah.
I think that's a really important tip. I know we're going to turn to mentorship in a moment, but I found, I've been president of the chapter for a few months, and when you're in that role, you realize a president can't do everything and how much you need and rely on the expertise and the input of those around you. So I think in crisis management, you're right, you're forced, if you're not doing it already, you're going to be forced to do that. So
Yeah. And also to be decisive, there, that's one thing that I learned during other challenging times or challenging issues. You can be a lot more certain of the data or information that you're using to evaluate and make a decision. During the pandemic, things were changing in terms of our, workplace and local situation. They were just constantly sort of changing. It just seemed like you were always making decisions with big gaps in terms of knowledge and information. And you just had to make that decision and keep going.
Get
And if
comfortable.
it's wrong, don't be afraid to say, hey, you know what? New information has come in. We need to shift a little bit, and here's how and why. I think people wanted to know the why. Why are you making these decisions? Even when we returned to office 3 weeks ago, why are we returning now? We had to have reasons. How are we going to return? And what are we doing to make the workplace a more safe environment, even as we return on hybrid days?
So turning to that mentorship piece, the book contains quite a few examples from the mentoring that you've done over the years. One thing that stuck out with me was in taking a hand. That tip there is that giving a hand to someone also helps you optimize your own full potential. And I think as mentors, we may not always consider that side. So I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about that and what you meant in terms of how that helps you reach your full, mentoring helps you reach your full potential.
Yes. Well, I even say, thank you. I even say to my mentees, I don't care where you are in your trajectory, there's someone behind you can help. If you've got into law school, there are college students who aspire to it, you can help them. If you're an associate at a firm, you've gotten into a firm, there are people in law school who are looking for a job. Obviously, you've navigated that well. So there really is no excuse, regardless of where you are, there's someone, who aspires to get to where you have. So don't think you don't have anything to offer. Yes, you do. And I think that acknowledgement that you have something to offer is empowering and validating and confidence building in and of itself. But what I've learned is from early days where you feel like you're asking a lot of people for help because you need a lot of it, to how you become a little bit more confident. If I were to add up how many people I've helped versus, how many people have helped me, I'm lucky they'd both be big numbers, but I've probably extended my hand a lot more to someone else to give them a boost up than maybe I've asked in return if we were to do a scale. And the advantage to that perspective, so I'll call it net give, right? The advantage of net give is that when you talk to a number of people about the challenges that they're facing in a detached way, where you can offer objectivity as opposed to it being you, you develop a muscle memory around people-related challenges that just serves you so much better as you encounter shades of those problems yourself. And so talking it through with someone else really does make you more adept, better, empathetic in terms of thinking. If you're if you have the honor of being a manager or motivator of people, the lessons that you learn, you carry over in so many ways, both in terms of solving your own challenges and, bringing the best to the people you might be entrusted to manage.
Interesting. So in mentoring the variety of people that you have over your career, I'm sure there were some relationships that were like really maybe successful or meaningful, or you felt like you made a difference, and maybe others, maybe not so much. So I'm wondering whether you have some advice to prospective mentors on how they can set themselves up to have greater impact for their mentees, whether you have any advice on that.
Yeah, well, again, I just think it starts with being actively listening. And, I always start with my mentees on where are you now? Where do you want to go? And I use the knowledge that I've gleaned to help them fill some gaps. Here are some things that I think you should be looking to do a lot more. Here are networks that I think you might explore to participate in. You need to know I should not be the only person you're looking to for career advice. You need to develop your own kind of like kitchen cabinet of people who can, you shouldn't be looking for just one, right? And so, that process I think has been helpful to helping people find their way. And so I just would encourage that that's a perspective that everyone can adopt as they mentor. And then following Deborah Hilton's lesson, don't be afraid to be a little bit vulnerable. Your mentee may look at you as this uber successful person that they aspire to be like. Give them the gift of knowing that you stumbled a little bit, that it's okay if they do too, that it's not going to be the ends of the world. Some students oftentimes believe like, oh, if I want to be a litigator and I get a job that's in employment counseling, that, oh my gosh, my life is going to come to an end and I'm never going to achieve what it is that I want. And you just have to relax. No, you can recreate yourself so many times in the span of a career lifetime that one decision doesn't end you, right?
Well, and often, I've actually said this to I have teenagers or a daughter in college, and just said, you learn just as much from those things that prove not to be of interest or failures as you would those that you end up really loving. So I think it's good to have experiences that don't actually work out, because you can kind of eliminate them from your purview or from your thought process. So
Right.
I think that's great advice, Veta.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking for even more advice from you today. I'm sure that a lot of folks who read your book were excited to see that a lawyer had become an author. So for those budding authors out there, how can they get started on their first book? What would you recommend?
Yeah, well, I will say looking at a blank screen, opening up Word and looking at that blank screen can be really intimidating. So the process that I followed, after I had that validation, from Rose, the talented writer who said, you should really write a book. I don't know if Rose arranged it or whatever, but that's how I ended up being initially emailed by someone at Forbes Books, who said, we have this authors program, we'd like to tell you a little bit more about it. And so their process is to send you an outline to see if you have a concept that really could become a book, or is it just, an article, right? So it started off, so I was able to follow the outline because it had questions that sort of prompted thought. And then after that, and was submitted, then they said, yes, I think that there would be enough here, to write a book. And there are two routes. You can either start working on it yourself. We can set some milestones and, you write your own manuscript, or you can go the route with a ghostwriter. And so I was curious about ghostwriter, because I was intimidated. And so that's how I was sent profiles on 3 different possible ghostwriters. And Deborah Hilton was the only one I wanted. But at that time, it said she's written 5 bestsellers. I'm like, oh, I hope she'd write with, she'd choose me. And so we were introduced and then had a conversation, and I loved her immediately. And we just really connected well. She told me that she loved my book and perspective too. And it was very cool because she's in Melbourne, Australia, which was perfect for my schedule. Because I have a big full-time job at ACC, even bigger during the pandemic, that runs all day into the evening. Deborah doesn't start her day until my evening. And the later I wanted to talk, the better it was for her. So, we would schedule, I think it was 7 p.m. every Thursday, my time, which was her morning. And we would have this conversation, then she would go write. And it was like a perfect collaboration for us. So I'll also say, if you want a ghostwriter, consider Australians.
I like that tip.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, while you were talking, I was so relaxed, the light went off in my office. I was just sitting here chatting to you. So I wasn't sure if that was a power outage, but it was just me not moving.
Yeah.
So thanks
So
for
Stephanie, the other thing I want to share is that as part of our writing process, Deborah kind of reduced the way she approaches an author to a series of self-paced learnings. And so she has posted them to a website that, I shared, and that maybe ACC-Northeast can post. If anyone wants to check out Deborah's writing process, she has this like self-paced coaching model.
And I understand she's using your book as part of the model. Is that correct?
What she tells me is that, I'm a lawyer, so I had questions. Why, she didn't just tell me something to do, but I asked her, why are you asking me to write something about this? Or why are we going here? So through answering my question, she realized that her approach to writing could be reduced to a series of steps. And so after we finished our book, she's just such a fabulous writer. She banged out the series of steps in a self-paced course. And so, that's one thing that I want to bring to everybody's attention.
That's a wonderful resource, and I think that we have posted it. So there's a post in the chat to all of our viewers where you can find the link to finish your book at, and there's the website that Deborah Hilton has called. So Cord has posted that. Thank you very much, Cord. So I do want to let our members know that I have one more prepared question for you. So if they haven't been thinking yet, maybe our conversation has sparked some other questions. We have some time for other questions, or if not, Veta, we'll wrap things up. But my last question for you is really about your journey. So the book took us through where you are to date in this, what I think is an interesting and fabulous job. But we're hoping that you're going to continue to lead the organization for many more years. But I'm wondering, how are you approaching your next chapter? And are there any more books in the works for you?
Yes. That's interesting too, because I didn't expect my book would get the reaction that it did. And right now there is a CEO of a company of 1,500 people, and he wants to make my book available to all 1,500 people because he wants it to be incorporated into how they think about talent, invest in people, and what people should be doing more proactively, like the whole take stock with the management. And that was overwhelming to think that someone was and grateful that they felt there was so much value there. Unlike many of the authors that Forbes works with, people work with this related to a business that they have. So Deborah shares with me she's helped salons launch books about personal care, healthcare, beauty care, etc. She's helped people in real estate write books on how to move into real estate investing. Mine wasn't really, I wrote this book because I had something to say, not because I was trying to propel myself to be a speaker on these topics, or to be a consultant, or to be, career coach to many, right? So I'm kind of stumbling and finding my way, and honestly just being open to what the opportunities might be. I've made a decision that related to this book, I'm only going to do things that I think will be fun and give me joy. So talking to you, talking to other ACC members about the book, that gives me joy. Happy to do it. Being asked to be a keynote speaker at an event, No, I don't want to be a keynote speaker, so I will turn those down. It's not so serious to me. It's still very much a passion project. And I think that's why I'm enjoying it so much, because it's a passion project. Do I have another book in me? Maybe. I'm thinking about when I spoke at a National Association of Corporate Directors event to a room full of board directors. And I shared with them something that was a little bit different, which is that I report to this high-powered board of top executives. And what is a little different between being at a nonprofit and being at a for-profit is every year your board chair is a different person. And so for me, I actually like that challenge, because it is having to be a quick study of people and expectations and style to serve one board chair well and meet expectations, and the next year they're different people, has an entirely different style. So I think at some point the book that I would write would be about being in a position of serving people who are very different in terms of communication style and needs and expectations. I think that could be helpful to people, and I've learned a lot about that along the way.
That strikes me. It's very interesting because I've been president of the chapter for a few months, and we have this wonderful executive director, Julie Duffy. And I've often thought about that her job, the president and the board and it changes so frequently. And just the emotional intelligence that she has, and those like her and like you, to do that and to do it effectively. So you're right. I think there might be something to that that's unique to that type of role.
Yeah. So Julie, if you're listening, let's combine at some point. We'll get together on that.
Yeah, I think that might be another group that
nonprofit life.
that you could talk with. Is I don't know if you've done that, the administrators, but anyway, that was really wonderful, Veta. I'm going to see whether or not there are any questions. I haven't seen any come through, so if we'll talk for maybe a couple more minutes. We'll see if anyone wants to follow up. Here's one. How does one go about taking stock of one's career and overlaying the constraints and opportunities posed by the needs and goals of one's family? So this sounds like a little bit about work-life balance, or combining your home responsibilities with your work ones.
Right. So, I would recommend just being clear on what your boundaries are. What is it that is flexible and not flexible in terms of how you work, or, what your own expectations and needs might be. And I think that what is nice is because during the pandemic, that's an analysis that all of us at all levels had to undertake. And I hope that it has made all of us, regardless of level in an organization, a lot more empathetic to the people at home and work sort of balance challenges that all of us face. I also think that one thing that I think we have to do as colleagues to one another is not go back to putting on that brave face, that brave face that there's no, crack in our armor. We arm up every day and show this perfect little perspective. I think we all have to be honest about the fact that everyone is struggling in different ways, and creating a more empathetic environment. So I think just being clear about, those expectations, how you discuss it with others, how you enlist the support of others. It's not necessarily take a hand, it's just sort of being more open and empathetic to all of your colleagues. And, there may be a choice that people have to make. Some workplaces may not do it well, or may want to shut down and return to that cold, hard sort of way that now I look back and see that we were all living, right? And So I think that's, in some cases what's fueled the Great Resignation, because people are being a lot more forthcoming about their expectations. And we all realize that maybe not every expectation can be met, but there are some that we have now all learned to set as non-negotiable. And I think that's where it should be. So for the person who asked the question, I hope I've offered you somewhat of an answer, but I think it's just really about being clear on goals and expectations, understanding that there can be workplace choices that you make that might make it a little bit more difficult. There are some positions that may require a lot more presence or more travel associated with it than may make you feel comfortable. But hopefully there are ways to navigate that to, mutual satisfaction.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent answer. Yeah, there's just what are the expectations of the job? Don't go beyond what you think you can manage, but also in the job you're at, manage those expectations.
And we all have so many successes to share, don't we? Successes about how while things were shut down or closed down, we were still able to navigate, serve clients well, represent the company well. And so that skill of taking credit, making sure that that's acknowledged and understood as part of your formal personnel record or evaluation process, not just existing as lore.
Good ideas. We have actually 2 more questions. Here's one. Can you speak to how you work with yourself to create a new positive habit or getting out of a negative one?
A new positive habit. Well, I've written a lot about my gratitude journal. That's something that really helped me through the pandemic too, because originally, my focus had been everything that was lost that I so enjoyed and loved. So really being purposeful about gratitude and all that each of us have to be thankful was very centering to me. And just, helped contribute to my mental health during, very challenging times. So that is definitely a new habit that I've adopted. And even as we start to reopen, my challenge to myself is to continue to be focused on that gratitude and the small things that sometimes when we're so busy that we take for granted. It helps to be centering.
Great. So the next question is, do you have any suggestions for someone who's practiced in-house for 25 years, is feeling burnt out on the law in general, but doesn't really know what to try next? Are there in-house legal skills you see as particularly transferable, or other careers that might make sense as a follow-up to an in-house career? So it sounds like, what's the next chapter? What's my next move is what this person is thinking.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get your head around that and figure that out?
Yeah, well, I'll share with you an experience that I had in the book. I talk about being at the 10-year point at Sunoco. Be careful what you ask for. I got exactly what I wanted, to be a corporate lawyer, Fortune 500, do the transactions, blah, blah, blah. And then I started like, well, is this all that I'm going to do? Is this going to be the rest of my life? Like, I have an interest in art. So I started like going through, it was like an early midlife crisis. Who am I going to be now, And so for me, I loved art, and, museums and thought about how the skills that I had counseling and helping businesses run might be used in a different nonprofit sort of context. So I would say it starts first with really thinking about what was your career choice had you not pursued law? We all probably have a couple, or things that we would be interested in. I'm a big believer, and I think my own career has shown that you can remake yourself multiple times, that, you don't have to necessarily stay with what you originally chose. But at this point, 25 years after practicing law successfully, now you want to consider it's your time. So what would be the other things that would give you, interest you or joy or, allow you to feel a sense of fulfillment, and kind of start writing them down. In my case, to move to the nonprofit management, I was living in Philadelphia, so the University of Penn offered a certificate program in nonprofit management and fundraising aspects. I took that thinking, oh, wow, maybe I could work for a cool charity and help them do development work even, or, the job that I ended up being offered. At the same time, I was offered to move from Sunoco to ACC, was to run a museum as its deputy director, calling upon all my business skills and review of all the contracts that the museum has to enter into, running the little retail store, like the retail store would have reported to me. So, it's thinking about your skills and how they could be applied in so many other ways. And I believe corporate counsel are very fortunate because we've been inside to how successful businesses run.
So I have an unscripted question for you because I love art too. And you are living right where there's a whole bunch of art museums. I'm jealous, and down in DC area. What's your favorite art museum?
I like the Phillips collection.
Oh, okay.
I like the Phillips because it's small. They have, or the other one right across the street from the White House is the Renwick Gallery. I like the two of them. I like the more smaller, intimate museums as opposed to like the big castles. It's just so much to take in. So those are my favorites. And the Renwick is very modern.
You can spend your day there. I like that and feel like you saw everything, and it's much more curated.
Yes. Yeah. And in my past too, I also had pursued, so all the things I pursued, an art history degree at Howard, focusing on African American art and different painters and sculptures and visual arts. So that tended to be where I was migrating, and that's kind of how I ended up being offered the position of deputy director at a museum.
Interesting. Well, I'm much more of a novice in art, but I love. I'll check out those recommendations when I'm back.
Yeah, well, Stephanie, what I would say is start. I started gearing my volunteerism towards the arts. So, like in the DC area, there's WALA, Washington Area Lawyers for the Arts, where you can do pro bono. I gravitate to that as opposed to all the other ways you could pro bono serve, and volunteering as a docent and stuff. So yeah, it's ways to pursue your passion.
Absolutely.
While you draw a paycheck from someplace else.
Exactly. Yeah. I think we have one more question. We have a few minutes. So I think we touched a little bit upon this, more on crisis management, but they want to know, what did you learn during the last 2 years of COVID and working remotely that you would like to continue doing if life goes back to normal? It feels like life is getting back to normal, but I guess they mean when you've really kind of settled down. What are some of the things you'd like to continue doing that you started then?
Really working remotely still, so we've returned to a hybrid, and former Veta, I won't say old Veta, former Veta, right? I was like geared up 5 days a week, like real excited to be around people. And at first, early stages pandemic, I hated it. I hated the silence, the soloness. But then at some point I started to enjoy it too. What I hope is that I continue to be mindful about the lessons this time has taught me, and not just charge back into the way life used to be, but finding a way to balance and keep the best of both.
I think that's great advice. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. Well, we have no more questions, Veta, so I think that's going to be a wrap. I really want to thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation, and we appreciate you spending some time with us. And
thank you.
I'm hoping that you do come upon that next book, because this one was, you hit it out of the ballpark in baseball lingo.
Thank you very much.
So have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. And Stephanie, thank you. You asked such great questions. You
Oh,
you should have like a little talk show doing this. Really,
well,
really put me out. Made me think. Thank you.
great. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye.